たくん。
おはようだと？何がおはようだ？待て！この悪魔！
何すんのやめて！
Yo, what it is? Radio Free Intimate episode 297. This week we're gonna be talking about idols. Because the whole idol thing has been something of a source of fascination for me over the past 5 years. If you haven't been able to tell by the litany of relatively well-done geophotoshops that have adorned my thumbnails, going back quite a while now.
That's a lot of...
Yeah, it sure is, but we're not just doing this episode because of its aesthetic commonality with the established Radio Free Innsmouth canon. No, there actually is a decent amount of idol groups or artists out there that overlap pretty heavily with the metal scene. You got Sakura Yoshida doing all kinds of melodic power metal stuff with Hagane. On the other side of the Korea Strait, you got Sarah Oh doing some very interesting Bloodstained Child style melodic death metal electronic fusion type stuff, and
나랑 룸서비스를 영어로 시켜먹기였는데
yeah, baby metal exists too, whatever. They're fine, I guess. I don't know, they're a little too silly for me.
I noticed a tendency for this program to get rather silly. Now, I do my best to keep things moving along, but I'm not having things getting silly.
I kind of like it when the idol groups take the whole metal thing a little bit more seriously. And that is why one of my favorite groups of this sort of metal-adjacent idol ilk is Necronomidol, who I covered on episode 248 just about a year ago. They have a really unique sort of tripartite sound, which is sort of pulled between the three realms of dark synthwave, very light melodic black metal, and dark symphonic power metal in a Japanese style. And they're probably one of my most listened to artists, both way back when I did that episode and honestly to this day. Now, they're not really around anymore, but my two favorite members of that particular troupe, Sari and Himari, just both put out their debut solo full-length albums this year. So that's what we're going to be talking about. Not that I got a problem with anybody else in Necronomidol. I'm particularly fond of the classic lineup on their second and third albums, that being Hina, Risaki, Rei, Himari, and Sari.
And yes, I remembered them all.
But for me, those two in particular always just kind of had something special going on. We'll start with Sari because she's kind of the Necronomidol OG, even if she wasn't on their final album. She was with them since the beginning, and she kind of always had the most striking aesthetic and the most morbid affectation of the bunch. Really not your standard sort of idol. The best summary of her overall place within the Necronomidol mythology can probably be seen in the video for Dawn Slayer. When that video starts out, you got Hina and Rei in some sort of boarding school situation. It's probably the dance studio from Suspiria, or at least it might as well be. Then you cut to Himari sitting on some sort of throne in Congress with Risaki and Himari, plotting something.
It is a bad, bad plan that will hurt many people that are good. I think it's great because it's so bad.
Then you cut to some kind of ritual chamber, and you got Himari pouring blood all over somebody, while Sari and Risaki look on in a very spooky manner. Pans down. Oh no, it's Hina. I got a hold of her somehow. Then time moves forward. Hina's dressed up all gothic like, defacing sacred icons and breaking things. Rei's crying. Boom, smash cut to Sari, sitting in some kind of big fancy chair with the other girls arrayed around her. Song title comes up, lightning flash, Dawn Slayer. And that's kind of Sari's whole role in Necronomidol. She was kind of like an evil force working from the shadows in more ways than one, because not only did she have this very ethereal, sort of ghostly sounding voice, but she also was involved in the writing of a lot of Necronomidol songs, which is pretty unusual for this kind of idol stuff. And she was always the real spooky looking one. Even after she leaves Necronomidol, she goes through all sorts of crazy different outfits, changes on like every single she releases. 5 years ago, I couldn't have heard myself saying this, but honestly, a big part of the appeal is just all these different wacky costumes. It's kind of like action figures. You know, you got Tatooine Luke, Hoth Luke, Pilot Luke, Return of the Jedi Luke with the black outfit, Sari with the wacky Lopan nails.
They have survived the burning blade.
And that sense of experimentation and variety that typifies her aesthetics as of late extends into the music itself on her solo full-length debut entitled Ending, because it's the culmination of singles she's been releasing going on 3 years now. Is it a continuation of her work in Necronomidol? Not necessarily. It really is more of its own animal. But if you enjoyed the particularly strangely structured electronic tracks that Necronomidol did, like the song Sarnath, path, you'll probably dig this album. I've seen a lot of people compare Sari's solo work to Bjork, and honestly, I heard that pretty much instantaneously as soon as I got the album. But it has just about as much in common with early Aphex Twin, or maybe even something like Boards of Canada, where each song is sort of its own unique sonic landscape existing in its own world, and the whole album feels like an extended tour through all of these different dimensions of her sound. And a lot of the songs are very big on juxtaposing contrasting elements. The first one that really jumped out to me was the song Milky Way. It starts out with this very gentle, sort of floating, icy synth landscape. Real atmospheric stuff before Sari comes in with the drum machine. And we get the introduction of an interesting contrasting element with this really heavy sort of bass sting that keeps happening over that very gentle bed of Himari's very subdued vocals and those synthesized pizzicato strings. Like, this bass line is almost too heavy for the song. It's an interesting contrasting element. Also, a lot of the synth patches utilized give me a very early 90s British IDM sort of feeling. So Milky Way is an interesting study in overlaying very contrasting elements on top of each other. You also have songs like Mekakushi that allow each contrasting element to exist in its own world, alternating back and forth with its own opposite element. Like Milky Way, this one starts out with a very dreamy sort of atmospheric beginning before Himari's vocals fade in, and she really shows off the variety that she's capable of. This is way different from that last song. You have these really short, clipped sounding phrases, intensely rhythmic, rather hostile sounding. She's basically sort of singing and rapping at the same time. But then the next section of the song, she takes a completely different approach. With this highly melodic vocal line clearly influenced by Japanese traditional folk music, rather startling juxtaposed against the more hostile sounding sections. And the whole song is just those two styles alternating back and forth. Another standout of the album for me. And there are other songs that aren't quite as heavy on the contrast here, but are still rather avant-garde in their construction. For instance, you got songs like Sari no Shitaku, or Sari's Wish, which features some very early Aphex Twin sounding synths paired up with highly treated samples of electric guitar playing, which is rather pleasing to the ear despite being clearly intentionally very glitched out. But as good as the instrumentals are, the real highlight of this track is Sari's voice. She really diversifies her sound here, utilizing a lot of different interesting vocal approaches to envelop the rather confusing and jumbled up sounding instrumentals, which, despite all that, are still rather pleasing to the ear. As mentioned earlier, songs called Sari no Shitaku, or Sari's Wish in English. I'm guessing that wish is for you to buy the album. I mean, I did. And when it came in the mail, I was pretty shocked because she signed it and wrote my name on it.
He knows my name.
Anyways, I died and I'm actually a ghost now editing this episode. But that's beside the point. Check out these fucking high notes. They're real good. Can't get enough of this lady's vocals. Fantastic stuff. And as amazing as Sari no Shitaku is, not even my favorite song of the album. That award would have to go to Jeopardy, which according to an interview with Sari, was actually heavily inspired by music from old RPGs, so I guess you could call this her take on dungeon synth. And it definitely starts out sounding like that with this almost kind of medieval sounding synthesized melody before this track's other defining instrumental element jumps in. This really cool kind of low end pulse almost sounds like something off of Graham Norgate's GoldenEye N64 soundtrack. And if you got any taste, you know that's sick. Her vocals on this song, probably my favorite on the whole album. She's a really interesting way of harmonizing with herself. Quite beautiful sounding, but also sort of warped and ghost-like. This part with the real breathy vocals here, with the drum machine and that bass line entirely dropping out, probably the most emotionally powerful moment of the album for me. And then it gets followed up by this absolute monster. Fuck that Boards of Canada shit, dude. We're going full Venetian snares, square push. Total unrelenting breakbeat assault. And yet, because she's Sari and she's awesome, she still finds a way to sing over it in a way that actually works and makes sense. I really love her vocals and the instrumentals. Anyways, Himari. She's my other favorite member of Necronomidol, and she also put out a solo album this year. And like Sari, she's kind of a non-traditional idol. She's pretty tall, dark, intimidating. By far the most metal member of Necronomidol. She's so goth that even when she does like cutesy idol stuff, like trying out different snacks for a laugh, she still wears the King Cobra JFS style dog collar.
That's what's most definitely up.
She has a whole lot of wacky shibari bondage stuff to her aesthetic, although lately she's been mixing that with more of a... But the main way in which she is really not your traditional idol is her vocal performance, which is very dark, velvety, operatic. It's got this, like, I don't know, like juiciness to it. You can hear that going back to her Necronomidol days.
Look at all that juice!
It really stands out when you compare it to the other girls' voices in Necronomidol, which are these more normal sort of sparkly idol-type voices. Himari's got this real sense of just darkness and shadow to how she sings that I personally can't get enough of. Technically, if Necronomidol are still around and are just on hiatus, she's the only member right now. So you might think, well, why is she starting up this new project Isiliel? Isn't it just Necronomidol? And yeah, it's definitely taking after a lot of the more metal aspects of Necronomidol's sound, but it's also definitely off in its own world. I'm guessing a lot of people going into this album, based on the two singles that came out before it, were probably expecting it to be very black metal. I mean, look at the names of the people she's got working on the album. Most of the instruments are done by a fella named Nikolai Hovland. Then you get the folk instruments being done by Christian Brynjolfsson. Then you got guitar solos by Håkon Aune. I mean, for fuck's sakes, the album was produced in Sweden at Studio Fredman by Fredrik Nordstrom, the OGest of Gothenburg OGs. And the lead-off single for the album comes out, it sounds like... you know, total atmospheric black metal. You'd be forgiven for thinking the whole album is going to sound like that. Not necessarily the case. While this album does have a whole bunch of black metal, the core of it sounds a very different sort of black metal. It's mostly a whole lot of Viking metal era Bathory mixed with a more modern melodic black metal sound. And in effect, a lot of it ends up sounding a whole lot like Moon Sorrow, which I will never complain about. Adding to that Moon Sorrow feeling is the fact that Himari wrote all the lyrics for this to be kind of like a concept album with a whole lot of interlocking musical themes. Check it out, big Bathory style riff with the big ass orchestral tom roll, leading into some big ass folky instrumentation.
Oh yeah, baby, like the big ass cigar, right? Hell yeah,
with that epic stomp along feeling being perfectly offset by Himari's amazing vocals. She worked great as a counterpoint to more standard idol style singing, but she's even more incredible as a solo vocalist. And all these harmonies she does with herself give the music a real big sound. In Necronomidol, she was mostly utilized to create sort of a sinister contrast with the other idols' vocal lines. But in her solo work, she really gets to let loose emotionally and try out a whole lot of different vocal stylings. I would describe a lot of her vocal performance as very rhapsodic or maybe ecstatic in the Werner Herzog sense.
Is there such thing as insanity among penguins?
Could they just go crazy because they've had enough of their colony? Well...
Again with those tom rolls, super Moon Sorrow sounding, at least to my ears. Unsurprisingly, her vocals also work very well in a power metal context, and there are several sort of dark symphonic power metal songs on this album that still manage to hold on to sort of that epic black metal feeling. Check out those fucking sick keyboards, dude. And when those vocals kick in, total Japanese power metal. Interestingly enough, she only does the random inserting English phrases thing during the power metal segment. So she clearly knows what she's doing, stylistically. I mean, come on, that's good shit. Check out those vocal harmonies. Total power metal madness, and yet the way it resolves is on this absolutely Nordic sounding Hammerheart era Bathory sounding riff, complete with some very Hammerheart era Bathory sounding epic drums. But I mean, is it really that surprising that a Japanese lady would make a really good power metal album? I mean, at least for me, Japan is like the country for power metal, with all your Versailles and your Mega Romanias and your Matt and Row operas and your Galneriuses. Speaking of which, there's plenty of that kind of power metal too. You know, that really triumphant sounding shit.
Excellent!
She even uses all the power metal verbiage, like Riding on the Wind and, you know, glory, freedom, that kind of thing. Check out this dank fucking build-up to an absolutely awesome a cappella section. That's some good shit right there. Top flight, power metal aesthetics, Rising to the Sun and all that. But much like that other power metal song I played earlier, it dips into other genres as well. Like this bit of just total melodic death metal 90s Gothenburg goodness. I mean, remember, Fredrik Nordstrom produced all the good In Flames albums way back in the day. I wonder if he had something to do with this. Speaking of mysteries and speculation, this part right here. This vocal part, is that even Himari? Doesn't even really sound like her. I don't know if there's some super secret mystery guest vocalist. Couldn't find anything in the album credits about it. It even starts harmonizing with a more standard Himari style vocal. Might just be Himari trying on some new voices. I don't know, just thought it was interesting. Cool part of the song though. This whole album is like that. Whoa, that part's sick. That part's dank. It's crazy. It's almost overwhelming. The only thing that bummed me out a little bit about this album was that my favorite pre-album single didn't make it onto the full length. That being Seizon Senryaku, which I did some pretty in-depth coverage on way back at the very end of the Necronomidol episode. But if you don't remember it, it's the one that's got the parts that go like... mashed up with the other parts that go like... I mean, it's kind of the best thing ever. It's one of my favorite songs I've ever heard. But I can kind of see where they left it off because it's not really a metal song at all, and this is a very metal album. In fact, Metal Archives made their first good decision in probably a decade and a half by letting Himari on their dumb old website. And I gotta think it's because this album, even during its softer moments, is still pretty much metal all the way through. I do savor those softer moments though. Look at this bit right here. Himari has always got this great voice for more danceable tunes. I really like how she's interlocking with the rhythm of the drums here. But you know it's gotta go back to being heavy sooner or later. So they start bringing in these percussive guitar riffs. Vocals start getting a little bit more intense. And eventually everything jumps back into that heavy sort of groovy power metal sound, complete with some very Hansi Kirsch style vocal layering, might I add. Damn good vocalist, this lady. And while this album is definitely very different from Necronomidol, it does have one very interesting commonality with the work of that group, specifically on their last album, Vamya Seriter. The final song on the album was in like a completely different style than everything else on the album. In the case of Necronomidol, they went into this like Tullis, later Satyricon style black and roll thing. But on this Icilial album, the program gets shifted up by going industrial. And I do mean full-on industrial groove metal type shit, while still maintaining that sort of Moon Sorrow-esque vibe for this industrial folk metal that I put on a Thundercraft album. Look at me over here talking like people know who the hell Thundercraft is. I bet you I'm the only guy in my time zone that even owns a copy of Totentons, let alone listens to it regularly. Also getting some second album Godkiller vibes, which for me is a good thing, but I know a lot of people hate that one. I think Himari knows that too, because this song starts gradually going back into more standard, groovy, Moon Sorrow-ish shit pretty quickly, although it still keeps that very danceable sort of backbeats. And that kind of keeps up until the very conclusion of the song, where it transitions into more standard black metal in a very interesting sort of way, by utilizing a very Gustav Holst-esque marching riff, before launching into that atmospheric black metal riff from a really long time ago. Remember, I played it at the beginning of the Himari section of this episode. Well, it's back here to close the album out. See, I told you this was a concept album. Henry Sorvali should be proud. And I think both Sari and Himari should be proud of their new solo albums, because they're both excellent. I actually might like the Sari one a little bit more. Please don't tell Himari that, because she carries bladed weapons, and I'm scared of her. But for real though, they're both great. Go out and get them. They're amazing. Hopefully you thought this episode was at least somewhat amazing. But even if you didn't, thanks for watching or listening or whatever you did. And I will see you next time.
I have seen the Magna Carta. I have seen the Eye of Horus. I was flipping bricks for Mansa Musa before y'all even became a Type 1 civilization.